Here's Edwards with a lane. Donovan Edwards down the sideline. Gets past Ransom. Donovan Edwards. Touchdown, Michigan. The Don. McCarthy in trouble. Here's JJ. Lets it go. Touchdown. Luke Schoonmaker. Michigan defeats Purdue 43-22. The Wolverines are back-to-back Big Ten champions.
All right. I really enjoy when I get the opportunity with all the interviews I do leading up to the beginning of the college football season. There's two I enjoy the most. I've just completed one a couple of days ago, and here's the second. The Michigan Wolverines and the 2023 season, which it better be the year, Aaron. Better be the year. We're running out of time, I think. Not that, of course, Jim Harbaugh ain't going to be here for a while, and that, it's just with this group, you just get the feeling this might be it. So how's it going, Aaron?
It's going well. Good to be back. As I was telling you before we started, I'm ready for football games to get here.
Oh, yeah.
But yeah, there's a lot of hype around this Michigan football team here in Ann Arbor. A lot of talk. They're picked to win the Big Ten again. But I think aspirations and the hype is for more. They want more. I mean, the ultimate goal this year is to win the national championship, and I think that's ultimately what this team's shooting for here.
Yeah, and it should be. Because all you got to do is look at what happened last year, and the four teams who were in the playoffs. Only one of them brings their quarterback back. Only one. So that should tell you where Michigan is, of course. And everybody loses talent. They all lose it. But Michigan's got their quarterback back, and we'll talk about JJ in a little bit. Phil Steele, who I love Phil Steele's books. It's awesome. Helps out, makes things a lot easier for everybody. But Phil, will you stop putting Michigan first? Please stop doing that. Every time he puts Michigan first, something bad happens. No more Michigan first. If Ohio State beats out Michigan this year, I'm going to blame Phil Steele. Okay, so
well, he's not the only one. I will say, like the media, our contingent picked our friends over at Cleveland.com. They always put together the preseason media poll for the Big Ten because the big conference doesn't do it itself. But for the first time since 2019, the media picked Michigan to win it this year too. And the last time they did it, again back in 2019, that Michigan fell flat.
Yeah.
So it's not just him.
You're right.
It's a lot of people.
Yeah. But again, love Phil Steele's magazine, so he could take it. All right. Let's talk about Harbaugh. Let's get this out of the way. I really don't. I mean, I'm so busy with so many other things in sports, and I constantly tell people I don't get myself involved with contracts. Yeah, if I have to understand the salary cap, just how much do you have, and even that is so misleading. So it's like I got so many other things. It's not my thing. Same thing when it comes to news like this. Oh yeah, I hear college coaches and maybe they'll be suspended for this, that, and the other thing. And it used to be a thing a little bit more difficult in the past because now I guess it's a lot easier, especially with the transfer portal. But anyway, I guess what I'm trying to say is I really didn't pay too much attention to what was going on. I was like, all right, whatever. It's not a year. Even if he misses a few games, whatever. Their schedule isn't that tough early on. They're probably still going to win without him on the sideline. So I really don't care. And now I'm hearing that maybe he's not going to get suspended. So obviously what is going on and what went on. So for anybody who's out there just like me, just too busy, couldn't want to concern themselves with, outside of Michigan and the diehards who know everything that's going on with Jim Harbaugh's life. What happened?
Yeah, so it's kind of long, but I'll try and shrink it.
Yes.
The NCAA began investigating Michigan last year, and this goes back to 2021. Coming out of the COVID year where the NCAA had kind of put limitations on programs and what they could and couldn't do.
Okay.
Michigan the football program itself was being investigated for several recruiting violations, both on and off campus and on campus. They were also accused, their coaching staff, of watching workouts on Zoom and so smaller stuff. It was level 2 violations. in the NCAA sliding scale, it's 1, 2, and 3, 1 being the most serious, 3 being least serious. So they weren't huge deals going on, but nonetheless, the NCAA was investigating it. Now, where Jim Harbaugh ran into trouble here, at least according to the NCAA, and again, we haven't seen any of these documents. We're just kind of getting one side of it. The NCAA says that Jim to be nice about it, they said that he misled them, basically inquiring that he either wasn't cooperating or flat out lying to them. And that's where the level 1 violation against Jim Harbaugh came up. And as I said, level 1s are the most serious. That's where the suspensions and the serious sanctions come down from the NCAA. And that's why Jim Harbaugh was potentially facing a suspension. Late last month in July, the University of Michigan submitted a negotiated kind of settlement agreement with the NCAA. They basically said, hey, Jim may not like this, we may not like this, but we're agreeing to a 4-game suspension to try and end this, to put it to bed. Because the way the NCAA wants, they want these things to be cleaned up as quick as possible. They don't want to have to take these to a hearing and go through the whole situation and drag this out. Now, we came back last week, and it came out that the NCAA had denied the negotiated settlement agreement. We don't know why. We don't know what happened, but there were reports that it broke down, which means that this situation, the investigation, is going to continue. It's kind of going to be kicked down to the cans, kicked down the road, so to speak. And this thing, it sounds like as of now, is going to go to a full hearing, which means it's just going to be delayed. It's just going to.
So it's not going to be a this year thing.
Correct. And that's the assumption right now. Now, it's always possible the NCAA comes out, midway through the season and lays the hammer down. But I think the assumption is where the NCAA decides, whether it's a 4-game suspension, 6 games, whatever, that Michigan will probably ultimately appeal and drag this out. So the assumption is Jim is going to coach every game this season.
So it could be one of those things where if Michigan does have a disappointing season and they got a couple of losses, that Michigan might be, can we get this over with? Maybe Jim will give him the games this year. Let's get it over with so it doesn't affect us next year. But obviously, if they're undefeated, they're not going to touch them. So
no, I think that was the ultimate goal to begin with this thing when they submitted the 4-game proposal, right? They wanted him to sit out the 3 non-conference games and then the Big Ten opener against Rutgers because, as you said, the assumption was they wouldn't really need him. They'd win those games anyway. It wouldn't matter. And then they get this whole thing over with.
Yes.
But that's not exactly apparently what happened. It sounds like Jim's kind of put up a fight. There have been reports that the NCAA wants him to admit lying or admit not telling the truth. I got to think that's probably playing into this. Jim maybe didn't want to do that.
Okay.
That's why this thing's kind of continuing.
All right. And this was from 2019.
21.
21.
Right
okay. Oh, this was the COVID year. Okay. Yes. Got it. All right. So let's talk football. And let's start at quarterback. So we said this last year during the playoffs that JJ had to step up. And unfortunately, the exact opposite happened in the TCU game. He played an okay game, but definitely nowhere near his best. His turnovers hurt them, especially the early ones, and he never really recovered. And we also talked about how he just seemed to be really, I don't know if you want to say cocky. I just think it was more of he's having fun. He's never lost. He's a kid. He's just enjoying life. But I hope, as I said last year, I hope that he looks back at what he was saying at the time and just chills out a little bit next time. Don't be, wear this, wear that. No, you haven't won anything. All right. So until you win a national championship, just kind of zip it. You want to talk big in the Big Ten, that's fine. Won back-to-back. You deserve it. Go ahead. But once you get out of there, because I know it's a quick transition, because once you win, if you win the Big Ten championship again, you go right to a Big Ten. Well, you go right to the playoff talk, and then all of a sudden you get that energy of that cocky. Oh yeah, we just won 3 in a row, and we're this. So chill out, and I think if he can do that, and I think that'd be best for him. But the bottom line, obviously, is his play, and I also think that matters as a prospect, as an NFL prospect, because I don't look at him right now as that much of an NFL prospect, to tell you the truth. I think he's okay. He's got obviously a good athletic ability. He's got a strong arm. He's got everything you want, but he still hasn't put it together, and to me, collegiately. And then a lot of it also goes back to, as we were talking all season last year about, was their inability to really click in the passing game. So how do you think that might change from this year, if at all?
Yeah, I think there's going to be more of an emphasis in the passing game. If you look at JJ's numbers last year, they were solid. I mean, he completed nearly 65% of his balls. He was very efficient in what they asked him to do. But as you said, I mean, the offense was rooted in the ground. I mean, they ran the ball like 61% of the time last year, which is insane when you think about it. They were like top 15 in terms of just the run pass splits nationally, and that was behind like the service academies and a handful of other teams.
Yeah.
So they were really rooted in the ground. I mean, it's not something we haven't seen. Obviously, it's the last couple of years that's kind of been the offense. But I do think with JJ's arm and his ability, I think there's this assumption and belief that this offense can become more than just one dimensional, that they can throw the football and they can get the ball down the field, through the air. And you saw it at times last year. I mean, they did a very good job against, Purdue, and they did it as needed against Ohio State, although, the receivers in the Ohio State game were wide open. It was crazy to watch that game.
Yeah.
But when you run into a buzzsaw like TCU, who can move the football through the air, and you mentioned all the mistakes they made, whether it was McCarthy's interceptions or the fumbles or the poor play calling, they needed to throw the ball to try and keep up. And you saw what happened. They didn't have enough there. So I think this year's offense, I think the most interesting storyline going in is how much more can they get out of the passing game? Because yes, they got a year with JJ McCarthy at starter. He's back. He looks stronger and bigger. So I think they're going to use him a little bit more in the running game too. But I do think that I think the passing game is what's going to determine whether this team is a legitimate national title, contender, or just another, playoff team. Because there's no question they can run through the Big Ten. You mentioned there's so many question marks at the Big Ten, at Ohio State quarterback situation. You don't know what we're going to get out of Penn State. So the assumption, again, is they're going to run through the Big Ten. They shouldn't have much trouble. They should win the league and probably get to the playoff. But can they get over the hump? And, we've talked about humps, I feel like, for years with Jim Harbaugh. And they've been able to accomplish most of them. Now it's getting to the dance and winning it all. And JJ's, I think, going to be a big part of that.
Yeah, and look, just at least this year, can you get to the championship game? Because that was the thing last year. How could you not get to the championship game? It was so set up for you. And then to watch TCU get obliterated, it was come on. I mean, that was just so disheartening to everybody really in college football. Nobody wanted to see that. So, is it possible for JJ? You said he's getting bigger, and I do think this is important for him at the next level. I think if he can. Now I don't know what he is right now, but if he could get his body. I don't know how it works out, and everybody's body's different, and whether you can get to a certain level without screwing up your mechanics and things of that nature. But if he can get to 215 or 220 with his size, that would go a long way.
It would, just especially with how much they're asking him to run. I mean, you saw that a couple of years ago when they first introduced him to the offense. He basically came in just to run the football in wildcat packages. Last year, you saw him use it at times. Last check, the roster has him listed, I think, at 202, which is up from 195 last year. So he was still a little bit of a twig last year. I've seen him a couple times this offseason. He has added muscle, and he does look a little bigger. So they're going to try and use him on the ground. I think they like his legs, and they like what they get out of there. But yeah, I mean, you got to be durable and remain healthy throughout the season. Now there wasn't much of an issue with him last year in terms of injury. They obviously had the problems at running back and elsewhere. But yeah, I think if he add a little bit more weight and withstand some of those hits, and that's the thing too. I think so many folks were scared last year of him running and just taking a big hit and him knocking him out of a game. Yeah. Didn't happen, but he seems unafraid of getting hit, which I guess is good in the competitor scheme. But like you always worry about him, get knocked out.
Yeah. Well, what is the situation this year now at quarterback? So is it just as worrisome or even more worrisome if something happens?
So they've got guys there they like. Jack Tuttle, a transfer from Indiana. He started a handful of games there, but it seemed like he was always banged up and always injured. All signs point to him being healthy now. He seemed like he was the kind of front runner for the number 2 coming out of spring. He started the opposite JJ in the spring game back in April. And then there's this third guy, Davis Warren, former walk-on. Jim really likes him. He's been put on scholarship. He's got a really strong arm. Interesting story coming to high school. He was I think he was diagnosed with cancer at one point. He was able to beat it. So he didn't play a ton of high school. And he came to Michigan again as a walk-on. Didn't play much his senior year because I think it was the COVID year in 2020. But he's really come on the last couple of years. Really strong arm. I mean, I'd put his arm up there with JJ just in terms of like he can fling it.
Okay.
A little smaller. But they've had no issues playing him. I mean, they put him in in garbage time last year in games. He played quite a bit in the spring game. In fact, you can make the case he maybe outperformed Jack Tuttle, the backup, in the spring game. So there are guys there they're fine with. Obviously, they're not JJ. They're not going to sling the ball around all the time and make a big play. But I think there's enough experience and I think arm strength there for them to get by, especially if they decide to keep it on the ground.
Who now they have a big time recruit coming next year, correct?
Yep, Jaden Davis, 4-star, borderline 5. Yeah, he's their next big college or quarterback recruit.
And so, what are the chances JJ stays another year?
I would put him as slim to none, maybe 5 or 10%. I think it would take an injury, a serious injury, and not maybe knocks him out or there's some type of debilitating thing where he's going to have to work his way to get back. But no, I think the assumption right now is that he's going to go to the NFL draft after this year.
And is it possible that the freshman gets an opportunity to start, or do you think they actually might look towards the transfer portal and give him a year?
Probably both. I have to think he'd be given a shot, but if you look at Jim Harbaugh's trajectory and just kind of past history with quarterbacks, he seems hesitant to playing them as true freshmen.
Yeah.
I mean, I remember when JJ came in, a couple of years ago, and I think the fan base just assumed there was going to be a competition there between him and McNamara, and it never really materialized. Yes, they used JJ in situations, but they just I don't think he felt comfortable throwing him out there on a big stage like that.
And by the way, no Iowa on the schedule. So unless they play in the championship game, which would be something,
it would be. It'd be fascinating.
There's not going to be a rematch there or a match. Okay, the running game. I don't really have to. We got a lot of other things to go through, but because this is just the best duo in the country, and if there's anyone better, then that's pretty good because Corum was on his way to a Heisman. Before the injury, and maybe that also hurt their chances against TCU. So he's back, and Edwards is there again. But both of these guys are gone. So this is it. This is their swan songs, you would imagine, right? Edwards isn't going to come back, is he? He's gone too, right?
Yeah, and he keeps talking like he's ready to get to the NFL. He keeps talking about wanting to get paid. So I assume if he can put up similar numbers as he did last year, whether he gets the carries or not, I think he's certainly going to be late.
Do they have anybody behind them right now?
That's the question. They got a lot of guys back there. I mean, a lot of guys. I'm counting 7 or 8 scholarship running backs on the roster at the moment. Now, some guys they've moved from the defense in previous years, but they got a lot of guys. So C.J. Stokes was a name we heard a lot last year. He had some fumble issues. He's entering a sophomore season now. He's probably in line to get for the number 3 spot. But they had a true freshman in the spring game by the name of Benjamin Hall, 5'11", 234.
True freshman.
Almost true freshman. Yeah, he's a beast. He's really thick, like in his legs, and they really like his motor. He was kind of a spring game standout. Now, I don't know if that's going to translate to the fall this year. I don't know. But Mike Hart, the running backs coach, is really excited about him. So I got to think it's going to be probably Stokes or Hall next.
Okay.
They did have another true freshman come in, Cole Cabana. He was a 4-star kid, local to the Ann Arbor area. He was their one of their prize recruits actually. Problem with him is he didn't come in until the summer, so he's just kind of getting acclimated right now, and he was coming off an injury. So I think they're going to kind of wait and see what they have in him. But I think the future at running back is probably going to be Hall and Cabana.
Sounds good. They're in good. And it should be. I mean, it's Michigan. So, but let's talk about the receiving situation because the tight ends, we've been spoiled for several years now, and now it's a mystery for us outsiders. So, is there another guy that's ready to take over, or is it kind of an unknown at this point?
Tight end, yes. I think tight end is going to be another strength of this team. You got Colston Loveland back, the true freshman who really kind of blossomed as the season went on last year. He had a couple of big catches against Purdue in the Big Ten title game. I think he had a nice catch in the bowl game as well. He's going to be a star. I mean, folks are already comparing him to Jake Butt just in terms of his ceiling. I talked to Jake Butt a few weeks ago about him, and he was raving about the kid. So I think Loveland's there. They do have some experience they brought in from the transfer portal, and AJ Barner, a senior from Indiana, another former captain, guy who played quite a bit. He can kind of block and catch balls. I think you're going to see both of those guys used quite a bit in the passing game. I think they're not going to have any choice because as I get in the receiver room, it's got to be probably the biggest question mark on this team, certainly the offense this year. You got a couple of guys back who folks are familiar with, Cornelius Johnson and Roman Wilson. Cornelius was rather inconsistent last year. Had that big game against Ohio State. Yep. So he showed up at times, but they didn't get it on a weekly basis out of him, and I think that's what they're expecting. And the Roman Wilson, he has the potential that break. He's got really good speed in that slot. He can bust a big play when needed to. Again, another guy who was rather inconsistent. He was banged up, dealt with injury, illness the last couple of years, missed games. So I think the key to for him is just staying healthy and staying on the field. So those two are expected to lead the group. After that, it's wide open, like wide open. They got a guy by the name of Tyler Morris, a sophomore who barely played last year. It sounds like he's their number 3 at this point.
Okay.
Darius Clemens, who I thought was going to be the number 3, has been banged up. Again, another sophomore, didn't play much last year. And then you got the coaches, Harbaugh and the offensive coordinator, Sharon Moore, talking like they're going to try and play these 3 true freshmen they got. So they've been working them quite a bit in practice. We'll see what they have out of them. But, I mean, it's really kind of a crapshoot right now. They're going to lean on those 2 guys, Johnson and Wilson. But beyond that, I don't know where the passing game is going to go. It's going to be fascinating. I do think they're going to have to lean on the running backs. I wouldn't be surprised if you see Donovan Edwards in the slot quite a bit. They're going to probably throw the ball out to the tight ends, and they're going to have to find some continuity in the outside because as of right now, I don't see a ton of it.
So Carmelo, and by the way, I just popped up on the screen a couple minutes ago, the rlads.com depth chart for Michigan. So Carmelo English, is he considered the top prospect out of the freshmen?
Yeah, definitely. He was a mid 4-star kid.
Okay.
He was a bit of a surprise because he's from out of the state of Alabama, which Michigan doesn't tend to get a ton of players to begin with, let alone at the skill positions. He was a good 4-star prospect who didn't sign and didn't commit to Michigan until like last December on signing day. So he was a bit of a surprise and quite a good land for them.
Okay. And then Johnson, he has really everything you're looking for in a receiver. So really, it's just, as you said, it's more about consistency. He's got to try to put it all because he's going to be the man. And with lack of depth on this team right now, or supposed lack of depth, they're really going to keep their fingers crossed that he can be the man this year.
Yeah, 6'3", 208. I mean, he's a good outside force. I mean, he's got good hands. He can catch the ball. He makes good plays. He almost reminds me a little bit like a Donovan Peoples-Jones a few years back.
Okay.
Where he was this high ceiling guy who can really make all the catches. But you didn't see it. You didn't see the effort or the the consistency on a week-to-week basis. So they got to get that out of him this year.
Okay.
And I think it doesn't. Last year, at this time last year, I was told by a couple of NFL scouts, folks familiar with the NFL process, who told me they expected Cornelius Johnson to go out to the NFL draft after this past season. He didn't do it. So I think that just goes to show how much of a disappointment his season was last year. He needed more out of. He needs more. So.
Yep. Okay. And then we talked last year about Roman Wilson. About beginning of the season, bang, 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 and then where'd he go? And then boom in the championship game, but like you said, that's more health, right? Is that what it is?
Yeah, like I remember one week he had like COVID, another week he broke his hand, one week like it was one thing after another. He couldn't stay healthy, couldn't stay in there on a regular basis, and it wasn't just last year; it's been the last couple of years. Where he'd have a good couple of weeks, and then he'd be out a couple of weeks, and it's like, where's Roman at?
Yeah, he's a dangerous weapon, and this is his last go around. Okay, offensive line. The good news is, apparently, even though some positions haven't been completely set, there's a lot of talent there, and this is the thing that I know. Again, we go back to a few years ago when we were talking about how it wasn't a coincidence. It was when Harbaugh's job was on the line. He understood enough of this passing game style, new age. I'm trying to do something that doesn't fit me, and I'm going back to. We're going to build an offensive line and a power game and defense, and that's why they've been successful. So. Now we're seeing it year in and year out, and this is great news. Is as long as that offensive line keeps churning out talent and then transfers, if you have to do it, which is what they have, they're going to be successful offensively. And so even though they've lost a couple of key guys on offense, um, including the center, they bring back. Well, first of all, they bring back both their guards, who are two of the top guards in the entire conference, if not in the country. But everything else is kind of, is that where we have talent, but we're not sure about where the holes are going to be filled.
Yeah, that's a good way to describe it. I think this offensive line is deeper than it was last year. I don't know if it's more talented. Time will tell there, but they got a lot of experience and just a lot of guys who've started games and are familiar with big time football. And I think that's kind of what they're going to be leaning on this year. Left tackle, we've been told that down to two guys: Darius Henderson, the transfer from Arizona State, again a former captain there. He played quite a bit of guard and tackle. In fact, the last couple of years he'd been playing a lot of guard. So they're kicking him outside there to tackle.
Oh, okay.
He's going up against Carson Barnhart, another familiar face who he started a little bit last year. He was kind of the sixth guy. If someone was injured, he'd go in and play.
Okay.
He was another guy who played a lot of guard and tackle, primarily tackle. It sounds like Barnhart's, at least through as of early this week, had the lead. Jim Harbaugh said that Barnhart, probably of the four tackles up for a starting job, he's been the best so far.
Wow.
Not surprised. I mean, he's a senior. He's familiar with the offense. He kind of knows what they're
True.
expecting. So those two are there. You mentioned Keegan at guard. There's no question he's starting. Center, again, another competition. Drake Nugent, transfer from Stanford. He's probably got the lead. He's a little undersized. He's only 6'1", 300 pounds. At least that's what he's listed at. I spoke to him in the summer. In fact, I saw him face to face, and he wasn't much taller than me, and I'm 5'11" and a half. So
Okay.
he's probably he's a little undersized.
Okay.
But again, another experienced guy who played a ton
Yep.
at Stanford. I think he was all honorable mention, all Pac-12 guy. He's going up against Greg Crippen, a kind of a returner. Again, a guy who's been at Michigan for a couple of years. He's 6'4", like 305, 310. So he's a bigger center. So I think it's going to come down to kind of how they want to play and what they're looking for. But I got to think Nugent's got the lead there. Right guard, you mentioned Zinter. He's a starter, no doubt there. And the right tackle, it's down to Miles Hinton, transfer from Stanford. Again, another Stanford transfer. And then Trente Jones, the kind of the incumbent guy. He's been, again, he's like Barnhart. He's been in the program several years. He has started before, not regularly, but he knows what they're expecting. So it's really interesting because you got three transfers coming in, kind of all going for starting jobs. Some of them may get it, some may not. But nonetheless, as I said, you got a lot of depth there.
Yeah, that's interesting because the depth chart at our lads has it a little different, but that's not a surprise because camp needed to kind of put it all together. And so what you're saying is it's very possible, and I think a lot of people just immediately assumed, Ladarius Henderson's coming in, right? He's going to be a big part of the offensive line. Yeah.
I mean, my projected depth chart has Henderson ahead, but the more we're hearing, again, it's halfway through camp, but
true,
they're raving about Carson Barnhart.
Okay, well, and I'm glad they're raving about Barnhart. That's what you want to hear. You don't want to hear, maybe he's not as good as we thought he was.
And it's important to point out, too, Jim Harbaugh has said that the first couple, he may use the non-conference, the first couple of games, to determine who's going to be the full-time starter.
Why not?
He said, it's possible they start one of the, one pair of tackles week 1, and then they go the other pair week 2, and then they'll have it set for week 3. So it may go down to the wire here.
I know you're not a scout, but do you think Henderson is going to then be a guard more than likely at the next level?
Yeah, it's a good question, right? Like he's played. If you go back and look at his time, he played more guard than he did tackle. So that tells me they like a bigger body, and maybe he's not as athletic as maybe some of the other tackles they've had in the past. I don't know, to be honest with you.
He's not very big either. I mean, he's tall, but he's not big. So
right. So I don't know. It's going to be interesting.
All right, and do they have, by the way, a young up-and-comer, somebody that you look at and go, watch this guy by next year maybe, or keep an eye on this incoming freshman?
Yeah, so Andrew Gentry is a name Jim Harbaugh actually brought up earlier this week. He was a true freshman last year.
Okay.
Jim wanted to put him in the potential starters at tackle and the depth chart, but he says he can't just because there's so much depth there. But,
yes.
Gentry's a name to pay attention to.
Okay. All right. Now, let's switch over to defense. And that defensive line, man, has really lost some players over the last couple of seasons. But they've done a really good job restocking, and here comes the next wave. And that's what's exciting about this year's defense is that even though they lost a couple of really good players, Morris, Mozzie Smith, and so forth up front, I'm thinking maybe this defense, if everything goes and guys develop the way they could, this could be better. This front wall that they have.
It's possible. I mean, they're talking Chris Jenkins up a lot. Again, a guy who's been in the program a while. He beefed up in the offseason. I think he's listed at 305 now. I think he put on something like 20 pounds in the offseason.
Okay.
He's been interesting because they've kind of moved him around during his time. I mean, he was like a 3-technique tackle for a while. Then they had him lose weight. Then they put more weight on him this offseason. So they've kind of fluctuated spots for him over this time. They're going to try and use him as almost like a nose, but they want him to get after the quarterback. So they're trying to push more pass rush from the interior, something Michigan hasn't gotten in the last couple of years. As you mentioned, like Mozzie Smith was just kind of there, blocking up traffic, so to speak. Where they're going to try and get the interior guys like Jenkins and a Mason Graham to get after the quarterback, in addition to the edge guys who. That's another interesting spot because they've really got 4 guys vying for 2 starting roles.
Well, that's another player, Mason Graham, isn't it? He's young.
He's good.
Yeah.
I think Michigan realized early on last year. He was another guy who played as true freshman.
Yeah.
They realized quickly that he's going to be really good, and by the end of the season, he was starting games.
And on the edge, and this is important because this is where they've been getting production from. So they bring in Stewart from Coastal. So we'll see about that transition up in Big Ten from Sunbelt. So McGregor, I think fans, I know I am. I'm kind of wondering now that this is his season. What has he got in that tank? What's there? Where's his ceiling?
Well, if you would have asked folks when he was coming to high school, they thought he was going to be the next Aiden Hutchinson.
Yep.
I mean, he was a high 4-star kid, local kid. He had a high motor. He'd play tight end and edge. Like, they thought he had really good get up. The problem was he was injured. He had like a torn ACL and a bunch of stuff.
All right.
So it really took him a while, I think, get healthy. And he's talked about it the last year. So just how mentally it took him a while to get back. He finally felt like himself, he said last year. And I think you really saw him another guy who kind of came on as the season progressed. But they're expecting big things. I mean, when they brought him on, they brought him to the program, they thought he'd be a 2 or 3 year starter. It hasn't materialized.
Yes.
But the door is open for him to become a starter this year. As I said, there are 4 guys vying for starting jobs there. Of the 4, Jalen Harrell is probably the leader of the group. He's a senior. He played quite a bit last year. He's probably got one of the edge roles locked down. And then the other 3, you mentioned McGregor. Derek Moore, a sophomore, he dropped 20 pounds in the offseason. So my assumption for him is they're going to use him hand off the ground, bull rushing the quarterback. I think that's what they want to use him as.
Okay.
And then the 4th guy, Josiah Stewart, you mentioned from Coastal Carolina. He was another pure pass rusher. He was a little undersized. I think many folks thought when he came in. They had him add, I think, 7 or 8 pounds in the offseason. So I think he's up to 230-ish, 235.
Okay.
So, again, another pure pass rusher. We spoke to Michigan defensive coordinator Jesse Minter the other day. They think they can use him in rundowns. We'll see. But I think they realize they got some pass rush. We'll see what they can do. But it's, again, another mystery. Like, we don't really know what these guys can produce.
Yeah,
just
there's
they
talent,
weren't every
but
down. Yeah, they weren't every down starters last year. They didn't play a lot. So I expect a lot of rotation. And even if 2 guys start week 1, don't be surprised if you see other guys start week 2 and you see a lot of rotating because they're going to probably try and throw everything at the quarterbacks this year.
Okay, let's we can go quickly with the linebackers because they're both back, Colson and Barrett, and this is, I got to tell you, I know there's been some good linebackers here in recent years, but I really think that these 2 guys together might be the better real, like even NFL pro prospect kind of pair that we've seen in a while here.
Yeah, Junior Colson's, I think, a name just flying under the radar. I think he genuinely, by the end of the season, I think you could be talking All-American status, like best player in the Michigan defense. It would not shock me. I mean, he was like second on the team in tackles last year, and he was playing with like a sprained ankle the entire season.
Wow.
I spoke to him over the summer, and he was telling me like He didn't practice much last year. His foot was in a boot for most of the week. He'd take it off on Saturdays and play. So that and the numbers were still insane. So he says he's healthy. We saw him the other day. The kid's bulked up. He's huge. He looks massive. So it's crazy when they first brought him in. Gosh, it was four years ago now. They kind of primed him for a Viper spot. Michigan's former defensive coordinator Don Brown. So he was using kind of linebackers in like a hybrid linebacker safety role. Now I think Colston's a legitimate like middle linebacker. Like he's ready to like crush you. He looks huge. So I'm waiting. I'm expecting a big year from him. You mentioned Michael Barrett, 6th-year guy. He was a guy who probably could have went to the NFL draft last year. Probably gotten maybe drafted late. But I mean he's an experienced guy. I think he's gotten comfortable with his role now. He was a former Viper in the previous Michigan regime defense, and he's kind of had to adjust to a different spot, different role. Yeah. So they're expecting a big year out of him. And then the name that you didn't mention, Ernest Hausman, transfer from Nebraska. He started last year.
That's right. Freshman. Yes.
So that kind of gives them depth. I don't expect them to use 3 linebackers on the field a ton, but it's certainly an option. It's certainly something they could probably do. And again, if God forbid one of them goes down, Hausman's perfectly capable of going in there and playing.
Absolutely, yes. I cannot leave him out because we talked about him. Matter of fact, I even talked because I have Steve Marek on, who covers Nebraska, and he talked about him. So yeah, this is definitely a player to watch. And in the secondary, so 2 corners gone, Turner and Green, but Johnson, we know his talent could be through the roof, and Sandersteele comes back, which is huge because we saw what a leader he was, and he's a sleeper kind of draft pick if he continues this trajectory. And then they bring in a kid from UMass, and then how's the rest of the unit kind of take shape?
That's the biggest question mark on the defense. There isn't a ton of depth on that other side. Their names there, their bodies there, not a ton of experience. So I think that is going to be the question mark of what they do there. The transfer you mentioned from UMass, Josh Wallace, is probably the favorite. In fact, him and Mike Sanders still have kind of gotten along. They're like best friends since he's gotten here to Michigan. Okay. So that signals to me that Wallace is probably going to be the guy on the outside.
Well, that would be good.
Yeah, he's experienced. Yep. You can question maybe the competition they went up against UMass, but he was again a 4-year starter.
Yep.
Familiar. He's got a basketball frame, so he's got good jumping ability. We'll see there. You mentioned Will Johnson. I think he can be very good. I mean, he was like Colston Loveland last year. By the end of the season, you realized, oh my God, this guy could be like really good.
Really good. Yes.
So he could be. We could be talking All-American status for him by the end of the year. So, I mean, they're okay. Safeties are set too. Rod Moore and Makari Page. I'm more comfortable with Rod Moore than Page. But Page, by the end of the season last year, ended up being the starter. So, pretty good. I got to think if Michigan get pass rush up front, it'll certainly help the back end. But they got playmakers there. I mean, Will Johnson, I think he had 2 picks in that Big Ten title game against Purdue. He was a star by the end of the season. Then Sandersteele just got better as time went on too. Yeah. They have considered moving Sandersteele to the outside to fill that second corner spot. They prefer not to. Jim said this week, in fact, that they think they're at their best when Sandersteele's at nickel.
Yeah.
So I think they want 5 guys back there, and it's just about finding that second corner.
And I can see most of the guys are young. So is there one young guy that maybe you think has the best chance?
No. That's the problem. There are some names there. Jaden McBurrows, he's a junior. He was involved in that tunnel scrap with Michigan State last year. Again, hasn't played a ton. We haven't heard his name much in camp, so I don't know. There, Miles Pollard's another name, but I mean, those guys just haven't played much. So I got to think right now it's going to be Will Johnson. You're going to have probably Wallace on the the other side, and then Sanders still
get hurt.
In the middle.
Those 3 guys better stay healthy all season.
Yes.
Yeah. And then let's not forget the big losses at kicker with Moody and Robbins gone. Big losses. Those guys were huge. So how do they fill those 2 holes?
Yeah, they came into the offseason, I think, assuming that Tommy Doman, their kind of up-and-comer kicker, was going to handle both punting and kicking. They've since decided just to give him punting, it sounds like.
Okay.
They brought in James Turner, transfer kicker from Louisville. Pretty reliable. He was pretty strong inside of 50. But anything beyond that is questionable. So okay. I don't think he has the leg that maybe a Jake Moody had. Pretty reliable, though. He was at Louisville for a couple years, so he's experienced. I got to think right now he's the front runner for field goals and whatnot.
Yeah, well, I see he had 20 and 22 last year, so that's good.
Yep.
That's they're going to need that. Okay, so prediction. What are you feeling
for the season?
Yes.
Season?
What are you feeling for the season? Do you think this team has what it takes to take that next step and to at least play in the championship game?
I do. Yeah, I do. I think we do our preseason predictions, I think, next week, and I'll have them going 12-0. It'll be the first time I've had them doing that, and since I've been on the beat, even last year, I think we just went back and looked, and I had them going 10-2. So I think this team is just so loaded and so equipped, and there's just so much depth at many of the key spots to where I don't think there's a reason why they shouldn't go undefeated. Just, the schedule works out for them.
Yeah.
They get Ohio State at home. The question marks there. The one possible, trip up is Penn State, because they do have to go to Happy Valley.
Well, they also go to Michigan State, and we can't not with Michigan State. So those are 2 road games. Yeah, but you're right. Penn State, that could be on paper, that could be the toughest game.
I think they're the dark horse. Everyone wants to talk about Ohio State and Michigan in the East, and rightfully so. But I think Penn State, they're going to be right there. They got a talented quarterback. They got starting. They got they got a really good running back. They're always good. So that's going to be and Michigan historically the last 4 or 5 years, they've really struggled going to Happy Valley.
They do
games. Luckily for them, this is a noon game and not one of those night games.
That's true. Where that helps.
It's loud. So
yeah. And look, they could lose a game and still go to the playoffs. So that's no matter where it occurs, even late, they could still lose a game and still be a playoff team. So because they got that Ohio State game at the end of the season. If they lose to Penn State, they lose to Michigan State, you can beat Ohio State, win the championship game, and you're in the playoffs. I think that would be considered a lock. So, all right. So that is going to wrap it up. Appreciate your time as always, Aaron. Now, you've got the Wolverine Confidential podcast, correct?
Yep.
How often do you do that?
During the season, twice a week. Usually you'll recap the news and then preview the upcoming game.
Okay. And then any particular days?
Usually Monday, Thursdays. I mean, it varies. We're not set to a schedule, but it's usually twice a week. You can find us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts.
I'll put a link in the description so people can easily click that and they'll go right there. So I appreciate it, Aaron. I look forward to talking to you during the season, especially if it's the kind of season that we are hoping it's going to be. And again, thanks a lot. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
You got it.